Hey everyone, it's Allie, and today I want to do a quick update for Attribute Stacking Gemling Legionnaire, as we've ended up finding quite a few small optimizations we can make to the build that only make it better than before. This video is just going to be a culmination of all of them, and they're not going to be in any particular order, and some of these may or may not apply to you, as they're all meant for different budget levels. With that said, let's get into it very quickly and discuss all of them, and get you on your way to potentially having an overall stronger build. All these will also be mentioned in the written guide as well, so feel free to read through it to see any changes there too. Now, the first one I want to talk about is going to pertain to the last little bit of technology that we discovered in this build with the 3 Dragons tech. What we were previously doing in the build is we were taking Volcanic Skin to give us added fire damage into our build to then allow us to shock and at the same time be able to add in Herald of Thunder. What we since realized is that it's actually potentially a lot better for you to just get yourself an Against the Darkness with damage as extra fire on it. If you get yourself a 4% roll and you put in a normal slot at the bottom by polymathy, you can get yourself 16% damage extra fire, which effectively gives you double the fire damage you had before compared to Volcanic Skin, which by itself should make your Herald of Thunder, Herald of Ice chains a lot more consistent. It should basically always guarantee they can shock every single boss you come across. What I said in the original video was that at around 400 to 500 intelligence or so, the Volcanic Skin tech feels pretty good for clearing, but not super consistent. If you were to get yourself to about 700 plus intelligence, it'd start feeling extremely consistent. And if you were to run a 4% Against the Darkness to gain 16% total damages extra, that would effectively boost you from 3 to 400 int to effectively 6 to 800 int worth of actual damage, meaning it should feel unbelievably good while clearing, and it should make it substantially easier to shock when you're effectively doing double the damage when it comes to shocking. We found that this is also just better because you get all of your passive points back, and what you can do with your passive points is either put them towards picking up Blurred Motion again, or you can potentially put them towards picking up Flash Storm, or picking up Acceleration, or whatever else you want to do with them. It's a lot better in terms of passive points, and I feel like I prefer this a lot more. And what you could do from there is, after you get yourself a damaged extra fire Against the Darkness, is you can then upgrade it to a damaged extra fire and percent intelligence Against the Darkness, which would give you your int roll back. And in my opinion, I would say the consistent shocking that you're getting from the Against the Darkness heavily outweighs any sort of intelligence you might be losing from losing your previous percent int Against the Darkness. And then from there, once you have yourself a percent int damage extra fire Against the Darkness in the mid game, you can always then upgrade to a percent dex, percent int one as your super late game version of it, with you then utilizing a Megalomaniac to pick up Volcanic Skin through it, as by the time you're looking to do that, and by the time you can afford that setup, your intelligence is most likely going to be at around 600 to 700 to begin with, giving you effectively the same amount of fire damage as you had before, while freeing up one of the mod slots on your Against the Darkness. So TLDR, get yourself a damage extra fire, upgrade it to extra fire and int, and then upgrade it to percent dex, percent int with a Volcanic Skin Megalomaniac as you progress further and further through the build. This, for most people, should feel really good, and I highly recommend to make the swap. And while it is a little bit more expensive, it is substantially better, as you can do a lot better without having to waste all the passive points getting all the way to Volcanic Skin. From there, we also found another small optimization that might save you a little bit of money if you're playing this build on a bit of a budget, to where instead of getting yourself a attack speed corrupt Pillar of the Cage God with 2 attack speed soul cores put inside of it, if you're swapping over to Tempest Flurry setup, you can instead go get yourself a 3 socket Pillar of the Cage God and to just put 3 attack speed soul cores in that. The maximum possible attack speed you can get from a corrupted attack speed pillar is 18%, 8% from the corrupt, and then 10% from the 2 soul cores. And given you just get 15% with a 3 socket pillar, it's not that far off. You won't really notice that much of a difference, and it would be substantially cheaper than getting yourself a high percent attack speed pillar instead. Very minor change, but honestly pretty good if you're playing this on a little bit more of a budget. So keep that in the back of your mind as something to consider if you're getting ready to swap over to it soon. Moving on from there, we also have a potential really interesting thing that you could do with the From Nothing jewel that we didn't consider before. This was a jewel that we were only previously utilizing to either pick up Iron Reflexes to then be able to get Bleeding Out and General's Bindings, as these would be within our Against the Darkness, and with a percent int 1, these points would effectively become percent int nodes, which would be extremely valuable, or to instead get ourselves a Resonance 1 at a higher budget level to then get Spaghettification for 7% increased attributes. But what we instead found is that there's 2 other keystones on From Nothing that are pretty good and worth considering. First off, we have Ancestral Bond, which would then allow you to pick up Mental Perseverance. This is what we currently want to anoint in a lower budget version of the build before we actually go Mind Over Matter, and this will allow you to get your Amulet Anoint back, potentially allowing you to then anoint something like Blurred Motion, saving you from having to path all the way over here, or to potentially instead anoint something like Insightfulness for additional intelligence, which would be a really big damage boost. The other really interesting and kind of cute option is to potentially instead get an Oasis one. These are dirt cheap, so if you don't have a from nothing in your build at all, just getting yourself an Oasis one might be really valuable. And the interesting thing here is that it reaches all the way to spreading shocks, which would then potentially allow you to completely drop coursing current from your Herald device setup and instead just run another damage support instead. It also ends up hitting escape strategy and careful consideration, which is kind of cute and honestly not bad, as it would boost your evasion by quite a large margin. Given we have very little percent evasion in our build, this isn't as valuable as getting an anoint back from getting an ancestral bond one, but they're both very cheap and basically nobody wants them for any build, so consider picking one up if you don't have an iron reflexes or a resonance one yet. And then finally, which is actually a really interesting little bit of tech, is that we could possibly run a different controlled metamorphosis for the majority of the mid game of this build. What we ideally wanted to do in this build was to run a controlled metamorphosis in this slot with a massive ring that then allowed us to pick up Drenched, Lightning Quick, and Pure Power for free. What we instead found is that we could instead grab ourselves a controlled metamorphosis in this slot with either a very small or a small ring, which there will be a link for in the description below, which ends up hitting Spaghettification. Spaghettification gives us 7% increased attributes, and eventually at a higher level budget, we would want to include a resonance from nothing, as it would give us a circle around it, allowing us to get Spaghettification that way. Because 7% attributes is such a large amount of additional damage in the build, you're better off to get yourself a controlled metamorphosis in this slot to pick this up until you can eventually get this with a from nothing later on. These are very cheap right now, as literally no build is using very small or small, meaning you can get yourself one with a very low minus elemental or chaos res roll on it for fairly cheap. This is by far the single base upgrade we can make for the build, and I'd highly recommend to grab yourself one as soon as you can because, well, again, 7% increased attributes is quite a lot of extra stats. That's pretty much everything that we have to discuss in terms of small updates for the build. They're all fairly powerful and they all make a pretty big difference in the build, and hopefully some of this helps you optimize your build a little bit further to, well, be able to do whatever content you're currently doing a little bit better than before. If you have any questions, feel free to leave a comment in the comments below and I'd be more than happy to help you as soon as I can. I also stream on Twitch every single day, so feel free to come by there and ask me of your questions. Or if you simply just want to come by and be a part of a community with all the other kitties, I'd be more than happy to see you there as well. With all that said, kitties, I hope you enjoy the rest of your day, and I'll see you all in the next video.